Colorado.
And hi, everyone. My name is Steve Bachtel. I'm the Chief Commercial Director here at MyRounding.
Great. Thank you both. So now that you know who is on the call with you, let's find out a little bit about who's on the call with us. So, should be a poll up on your screen. What is your role in the organization? We're expecting that we probably have quite a few C-level or executives on the phone, but we'd like to know kind of who we're speaking to so that we can tailor the conversation a little bit more. See a lot of you jumping on that poll, which is great. Thank you so much. Give you just a few more seconds here. All right. It looks like we've stopped voting. So as you can see, we do have a lot of that executive leadership or C-level staff on our call, as well as some department managers, some project leaders, no care team members, and then some non-staff or consultants. So it's a great spread. And with that, let's jump into it.
Well, thanks, Katie, and hi, everyone. This is Steve Bachtel again. We wanted to take a moment just to quickly define what HRO, or High Reliability Organization, really means. So high reliability is that science of achieving efficient and error-free operation. It's really being used worldwide, globally, by lots of different industries. And so we're very lucky because we get to borrow a lot of those best practices and bring them over to healthcare. A high reliability organization is an organization with predictable and repeatable systems in place. And as we all know from the science and the research, that predictability and that repeatability is really what is driving some healthcare systems to really excel in outcomes and results today. So Katie, if we could, yes. So the first thing that we'd like to do is make the case, of course, for high reliability. And I'm going to turn this over to Tony Gorski. And Tony, on this particular slide, we have an airplane in the background. And that's interesting and kind of important. And maybe tell us why.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So again, hello, everyone. I want to be very clear that even though high reliability, which really means error-free operation, we look at other industries. Make no mistake, healthcare is not aviation. Healthcare is not oil and gas. It's not banking. It's not nuclear. It's not military. So there are nuances we must consider when approaching healthcare with HRO. But as you see on that slide, here's a case where in high-risk industries, including those I just described, their goal is error-free operation. So every time we do something, take a patient call, administer a drug, file the right charges, discharge a patient, the prognosis, the diagnosis, the scans that we do, the workflows of a nurse, of an administrator, of a manager, every time we do it, do we do it out of every time we do it within the year? Do we do it correctly most of the time, some of the time, or it takes a bit of effort? We're trying to figure out with an HRO how to make sure every single time it's done consistently. Not maybe the same way, but consistently. I get the same result. So as you can see, healthcare is noticeably missing from this list. And Katie, if you could, so as an example, you might have heard these correlations before, but U.S. aviation, not aviation in general, but U.S. aviation is one of the safest industries in the world. That was not the case in the 1970s and 80s. But they've used a number of techniques, both culture and process related, to enable them to have a parts per million quality level, some would call it Six Sigma quality levels, that healthcare just hasn't been at yet. And I'm sure some on the phone call have read the recent article that's come out about the To Err is Human report back 15 years ago, 18 years ago, came out and talked about the number of deaths in healthcare that are preventable. And now they actually came out and said it's more than that. We haven't really made ground in that amount of time. Well, there are some things we're going to talk about in this phone call that will help you tee up a proper HRO strategy so we can actually start approaching those other industries. As we start, I want to be clear that this webinar is not going to be a regurgitation of the ebook. The assumption, if you want to listen to it later, is that you've read the ebook and now we're going to take it to the next step. I need to point out, especially for the leaders in the phone call, that as this chart shows, most transformations fail. And it's not because they use the wrong tools or techniques. It frankly has nothing to do with tools. It has to do with the perceptions and the setup of the change before you start. So we're going to throw to you a few examples today of things to consider as you're setting up your facility for a change.
So Tony, that last slide talked about over 70% of transformations failing, and that's in outside industries. That's not in healthcare. So there's even more obstacles, I think, in the way when it comes to healthcare. In fact, a lot of the research shows us that when you place this into healthcare, it's more like 80 to 85%.
That's right.
Of initiatives might fail. So there's some unique obstacles when it comes to delivering high reliability into healthcare. Why don't you start us out with what is really necessary to get the ball rolling when it comes to implementing HRO within healthcare?
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Steve. So the first thing, it's not going to be a surprise, but I'm probably going to give you a different twist on how to look at it. It's making sure that the leadership is aligned, which often is not the case, and there's an accountability structure in place to manage it. So this is kind of pre-work. This is before the big announcement. You pass out hats on HRO, you train everybody. This is way upstream from that, setting you up for success. So to that point, next slide, Katie. I want to talk you through something just to consider. And the goal of this slide before I present it is not to have the answers, but just identify the pitfalls, the gotchas, the one that went awry in your previous history before we start to address HRO. So here, if we do everything well, we have a shared vision at the leadership team. You provide the proper skills and training, and there are different versions of what proper means for skills and training, by the way. It is not always suggested that you spray 1,000 people with training and then wait months to deliver something to them. It has to be tied together. But if you provide the right skills and training, give them the right incentive, which is not cash-based, money-based, but other, and then provide the right resource, they do something about it, you get a great change. Well, leaders need to step back for just a moment and say, what if you got everything right, but you kind of missed on the vision? And I want you to think about this on the phone right now. I want you to think about either your current environment or previous environments. Have you ever done everything pretty well, but you kind of missed on vision? So the end result is confusion on the right-hand side. Let's say you did that well, but maybe you missed on the skills and training. So you got everybody aligned in a vision, but you didn't, especially in healthcare, provide the right skills and training. You get a lot of anxiety. This, by far, is the #1 blind spot, or white space, I'll call it, when people are trying to go down an HRO road. And then next, if I get that right, but I don't perform the right incentives, provide the right incentives, you get gradual change. Yeah, I'll do it, but I'll do it when I have time. And all of a sudden, it splinters. If we do that correct, but you don't have the right resource, not number of resources, but also type of resource, if I don't have that, you get people frustrated. You get people frustrated that have to do the work that don't have the right skills potentially because they're not the right resource, or you get frustrated outside of the group watching the change because you know it's not working. And then lastly, if you get all those things right, but you miss on getting stuff done, you end up with a bunch of false starts. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do on your journey is step back, assess your culture on these white spaces just to identify, do we have these? Because if you do, it changes the course we take. It's not going to stop us from becoming HRO. If anything, it's going to accelerate our process to HRO, but you have to look in the mirror and just kind of assess the health of that culture before you continue. So with that said, and this is maybe a longer conversation, but I want to just tickle you with a concept you could use in your own environment. Here we call it the sticky index. How well does your organization accept or make sticky any improvement they make? So how sticky is change once delivered in your culture? So here's an example. To make changes stick in your organization, take a moment and self-score your team's performance. Now, your team could be the executive leadership team. Your team could be the entire staff of the hospital or facility you're in, or the team could be a specific department. But regardless of your scope, graded on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being we've got issues, we're not exactly great, 5 being you think you're top notch, and grade yourself on some HRO enablers. So here, let's talk about that list. Does your culture or this group you have in your mind, is there a continued removal of waste concept? And do they attack non-value added activities? Is it kind of ingrained already in the culture? If so, it's a 5. If you don't even know what non-value added means, it's probably a 1. The built-in quality through stop and fix mentality. This is talked about, frankly, in the ebook if you haven't read it. So if something goes awry, do people, because the toxic culture maybe, or they're not ready to address it, look the other way? Or if they don't look the other way, they'll say, I hope somebody else tackles it. Or is it stop everything, pull the ripcord, and make sure we attack it before it happens again? Just grade yourself on that. And then on the third, it says discipline or root cause problem solving. So let's say we've identified an issue. Many groups don't really do well solving an issue. So if you're very good at not just root cause analysis, but solving it, not just the pointing it out, but coming to a conclusion, addressing, implementing, and solving, then you'd be a 5. If you really struggle with that, I'd list yourself a 1 or a 2. Then the ongoing improvement through employee empowerment. This also was talked about in the ebook, and that concept is, do I defer decisions down to the right layer, or is there a hierarchy I have to follow that slows problem solving? So just assess your ability to empower people. They think that they can literally go find something and make a change, or is there a bit of red tape they have to go through? And then lastly, do you get stuff done? Can you execute? And this team, this facility, this department, whatever you have in your head, grade it on a scale of 1 to 5, and then total your score. This exercise is not for you. Katie, go to the next slide, please. This is why we do the exercise. What you see on here is the same list, but you'll see P1, P2, P3, P4. Those are individuals. And this is an actual example from a leadership team in the Midwest at a hospital, about 500 beds. These 8 people, so P1 through P8 is their leadership team. And in that leadership team, they separately graded themselves in these areas as a leadership team and hospital. And just digest for a minute the scores on the bottom. So same hospital, same leadership team, and they're scoring themselves from a 5 to a 12. There is no alignment at the leadership level on their assessment of this group's ability. What's more, you don't see any 4s and 5s on those rankings. So that tells me that before we induce something like HRO on this culture, let's just take a step back and make sure we know what we're getting into before we start. And there's more to share on this concept, but I wanted to at least tickle you with this because it's a very powerful tool to get leadership alignment as you're beginning this HRO journey.
So Tony, if we can go back to that slide for a minute, as I look at this slide, I know if this were my team and I'm looking at all of these 1s, I'm starting to wonder, is this the team for the job? Do I even bring them along? Or do I have to go find new talent? Or what do I do if I've scored my team this way, or my team has scored themselves this way? How do we move forward?
And what's interesting to that point, Steve, just so the group understands, look at person 5 for a minute. That's their CEO, just for the record. And the individual that's driving their HRO journey, I'll give you a minute and guess who you think that person is. The person driving their HRO journey in the Midwest here. That person's P2. So to Steve's point, it's not a right or wrong answer. All this is meant to do is shine a light on any misalignment we have, because I'd rather fix it now in a safe environment together than have our teams underneath us see this as we start the process. So it's not a changing of the seats on the bus, although in some instances that might be required. That's not it. The goal is more awareness. If we clearly have lots of 1s, like this empowerment line, there's nothing scored more than a 2 on that line, we probably need to address that and make sure that in all our messaging on our HRO journey that we acknowledge this to our employees so they know that we know, helps move the train along and doesn't stifle progress. So it's not really an exercise to make assessments of individuals. It's an exercise to see how aligned the team is so we don't spray different leadership on the same journey. That's really the intent.
Okay, so that makes sense. So great, I get to keep my team, so thank goodness. But it looks like we probably have to work on some of our habits. We probably have to work on some of our skills if we're gonna make it through this process.
That's right, and it's not, again, an individual thing. Out of these 8 individuals that are C-level and VP level, part of it's just an acknowledgement from the group that, Houston, we have a small problem. So instead of just following the next journey, the next project, which might be in your world HRO, we're going to talk later on the actual journey itself. This is not a 6-month to 12-month, let's get it done and let's move on to the next thing. This is a lifestyle change, and we'll get to that a little later.
Okay. So Tony, so far the component that we just looked at was delivering high reliability to healthcare, and really the last few slides were a lot about introspection. We had to think about our teams, we had to think about where we are as an organization, and are we prepared to launch something like this. Now I think we'd like to talk about the characteristics of a high reliability organization. What does the end state kind of look like? What does our goal look like? So maybe help us dive into that.
Yeah, so for those on the call, I would encourage you to refresh back to the ebook, which is what you see here. And our goal on webinars, everyone, is not just to regurgitate what you learned in the ebook, but to kind of add flavor to that. So I'll just mention a couple of things here. The preoccupation with failure. What that basically means is these people in an HRO headset are dogs on a bone when something fails. In many environments, as most of you know, we have near misses in healthcare. And when we have a near miss, the thought could be, whew, thank goodness that we caught it in time. Great job, guys. And that's valid. However, from an HRO lens, you're looking at it saying, there's no excuse for a near miss. What happened? Let's go problem solve and root cause. So it's a different lens on the same problem. The sensitivity to operations and making sure that we talk to the people and give them the right direction on how to make a change. If you could go to the next slide, Katie.
And actually, I'm sorry, Tony, I don't mean to interrupt you, but if you could go back one step, because I know you were about to talk about sensitivity to operations, but there's one here, the deference to expertise, that I was a bit confused on this one. Because when I think of deference to expertise, I think about keeping my mouth shut and listening to the boss. Yeah, and I don't think that's what that means.
Yeah, well, and that's the challenge here, is deferring to those that are in the know. And typically, the people that are in the know are the ones working in that particular workflow. If it's registration, if it's the transfer from the ED to the OR, if it's handling charges in rev cycle, whatever that is, we need to kind of defer to the expertise of that group. Here's the challenge. When we want to go down an HRO journey, many on this call might have done what I'm about to describe. You want to get people excited. So what do? Next Thursday, you hold a team meeting at 3 p.m. and you bribe them with pizza because everybody loves food, as I do as well. So they come to the meeting, they have some pizza. It's an hour meeting, 15 people in the room. And why 15? You invited one person from every department to make sure that everybody was quote unquote bought in. In that hour meeting, how many people talk? Maybe two. Maybe 2 or 3. What are the other 12 people doing? We've got to be able to pull them into the conversation and not have them just sit and listen and get frustrated. There's got to be boundaries and closure for them. And there are some ways to get that done, Steve. So that deference to expertise is casting a wider net on those ability to solve a problem and not thinking I can do it myself.
No, that's great. And that's what I was curious about. So then you were talking about operations and wanted to talk about this slide.
Yeah, so this is a big deal. Many of you probably will not have heard this before. In healthcare, a trap that we have is chasing averages. If it's HCAHPS percentiles, if it's outcome-based, if it's getting 52% to 58% or 92% to 95%, it's an acute binary number-based system. And that is not how an HRO organization thinks. They think variation, not average. And here's a quick little funny story. So I have a frog. One of the legs of the frog is in dry ice. The other leg of the frog is in boiling water. On average, he's at room temperature, but in reality, he's dead. The average didn't kill the frog, the variation did. And too many times when we look at processes and those characteristics of an HRO, we have got to chase the variation. I would rather keep the same average, to be honest, and reduce the variation around that average, because then I can predict it. Instead of blindly trying to move an average down and kind of not understanding the array of variation across that. So what that means is every time I, take a phone call or do a discharge or something, and it takes me, 45 minutes on average. Well, the variation is 15 minutes to 8 hours. That's what's killing my HRO process. It's not the 45 minutes. We have to shift our headset from chasing averages to chasing variation. And with that said, you probably are thinking of your own environment, and just for a minute, sit back, even in your facility or your system or your department, and think about two aspects. On the x-axis of this slide, you have the organizational processes. So the sophistication, the protocol, the robustness of your process design. On the y-axis, you have that particular group's ability to rapidly fix stuff and continuously improve. So we would encourage you to plot either your facilities within the system or your departments within a facility or your units or teams within a department, and just kind of assess where they sit on this graph. And you see 3 stages here: the fundamental stage, the process-driven stage, and the customer-driven stage to get to an HRO organization. If we were to actually plot, let's say, departments of a hospital, they're not all going to be in the same spot. So as you see here, Department 1 fixes stuff really well, but they're working in an environment that doesn't have robust process. Department number 4 has robust process, but frankly, when things break, they can't get out of their own way. The last thing we can do as leaders is put upon both of those departments the same expectation set and expecting the same result. You have to be able to navigate and meander to make sure that you're addressing that specific group's needs. And it's tough, guys. This is not, again, a 3 to 6 week program with a degree on your wall. This is going to take some time to get this culture ready for change.
So thanks for that, Tony. Yeah, I think I'm thinking of all sorts of improvements that we're making with our current customers right now, and they might have one goal for the entire system or one goal for an entire hospital, and I'm already thinking that we need to go back and start really talking about individual goals at individual department levels. So we've talked about how to prep, kind of do that introspection. We've given some tools that will hopefully help us get towards high reliability. I think now it's time to plan that out. So how do we plan for this journey?
So if I can refer back to the ebook, listen, I know it's very high level. However, if you're interested, each one of these items is an hour webinar by itself. But just to give you a flyover, as we look at this journey, the analyzing the safety problems, designing the model, transferring knowledge, developing skills, kind of to the slides that we've talked about thus far, Katie, if you could, I think there's a couple of base components that we need to understand. And listen, HRO through the years has probably got a number of different frameworks that have been used, and it's fine if you have your own, it's fine if you take someone else's, but you need something. So if you take a look at this slide, it starts with the leadership component we started with today, and we happen to call it evidence-based leadership. So what are those things that are proven that leaderships have to do to hardwire the expectation process before we get others engaged? So that's number one, those leadership, the sticky index and some other hardwiring that we haven't talked about in this call. But number 2 is probably the most important, and here's why. We call it the process improvement engine. And let me just play for you an example. So Steve Bachtel runs Bachtel Health System, and in his desire to do HRO, he gets excited. And he tells all 4 of his hospitals to go learn about HRO, go through training, and please give me all your ideas for improvement. And it's almost be careful what you wish for. Let's say they do. And now Steve after 3 weeks, is sitting on 150 things that they say have to be improved. If we don't have embedded a process improvement engine to fix these things, maybe not all 150, but even 50 of them, if we don't have a process inculcated in our culture that can standardize and consistently fix problems, you're going to lose all the traction you started with. Steve Bachtel trained 10,000 people or 1,000 people across the system, and they went out, got trained, got excited, identified problems, but here's where people get stuck. If they don't have, and think of it this way, the other industries, when it comes to process improvement, they have people full-time that come to work thinking about how to fix stuff, and their whole goal is to problem solve and address issues. In healthcare, many of us don't have that luxury. The population we have to go fix stuff is typically the nursing staff, and typically the nursing staff got into healthcare to help patients, not necessarily to implement detailed problem-solving techniques. So there's a learning process here and an engine that has to be created before we lay upon that all these great ideas. And then once that's established, we then go to, all right, now that we have this engine and the leadership is aligned, we now have to talk about patient safety and quality. And that by itself is probably another webinar on making sure that we're identifying what a near-miss adverse event is and what we're going to do about it going forward and how we look at each of our workflows. There's a science behind how we do that to get to number 4, operational excellence. So here's just another case study. What I'm about to show you here, next slide please, is a hospital. Oh, sorry, before I tell you about the hospital, please go ahead, Katie.
All right. So we talked a little bit about the journey. So we wanted to check in to see where you think you actually are in your journey. So go ahead and take a minute and see what part of your journey you're in. Are you just starting to think about it? Are you kind of starting to plan? Are you already implementing and starting to integrate it into your culture? Or do you already think that high reliability is a great part of your organization? You just need to hone it in a little bit more. All right, so I'm seeing a few more votes coming in. And I'm going to close it. So, I mean, we have actually a pretty good spread here.
So there you go. So we have a group that's kind of just learning about it, some that are in the planning stages, which is a great place to be as you're learning here, and then those that are starting to implement. So this is a good time to pulse check where you are. And listen, the items and things that we're talking about warrant longer conversations. However, our desire here is to give you some things literally after this webinar you can kind of do on your own without, you know, in addition to that ebook, without anybody else getting involved. And to this point, I'd like to at least share with you, if I could, Katie, an example. So from that process improvement engine, that number 2 on the previous slide, let's talk about what a hospital did. And this is going to be very quick. We asked one hospital. These guys are about, I think, I'm thinking 500 or 600 licensed beds. That's how big they are. They happen to be in the West. And here's a hospital that's, as part of their HRO journey, chose to do this thing called Lean. That's for a different phone call. If you don't know what it is, maybe reach out to Katie or Steve and we can talk. But it's this process, continuous improvement process that has been pulled over from manufacturing. So this hospital on their HRO journey has been doing Lean to answer that process improvement engine component. So we asked different people, about 50 different people in the organization, what the definition of Lean was, and this is what we got. As you some of you might not even know some of the things on that page, but it is so widespread. They're actually performing improvements, but they're random acts of Lean that are not tied together. So this particular health system is under mass confusion at the moment on what this process improvement engine really should be. So what you end up with is pockets of improvement that are not tied together, and it's kind of focused on micro areas or departments that the rest of the organization cannot leverage. So here's a trap for you. As you're trying to create that process improvement engine, you need a standardized approach to your techniques, your tools, etc. Again, this might be a separate phone call or something, a webinar that we could set up, but you have to have a common language. It doesn't have to be, you can pull it from somebody else, you could create it on your own, but whatever you do, make sure that we're all speaking the same language. Otherwise, we're in Babylon. And we've got 25 languages. We all think we're going the right direction, but you're not. And if that leadership component upstream doesn't have a check and balance in it to make sure that we're on track, here's where that disparity comes. Here's where that slivering of intent happens. And to that point, we thought we'd at least show you a sample roadmap of an actual health system and what they're doing. So, and guys, listen, HRO is not a 3-week or 6-month process. To create error-free operation, just digest that for a minute. To create an environment where you walk into work every day of every week of every month for a quarter, let's say, and for a quarter, nothing went wrong. Most of you on this call are going to say, Tony, that's not possible. And you know what? You're right, that's not possible. But if you have that as the path, and you enable the fixes and all those improvement processes underneath, and adjust culture to bring things to the surface, and patient safety initiatives tied underneath HRO with leadership on the front end, you've got a fighting chance. And that's the path for HRO. Perfection, of course, is the goal. Very tough to get, especially in healthcare. I would caution you when you take approaches from other industries, I'll just pick on manufacturing, when Toyota makes an automobile, the luxury they have is the car doesn't have a sex, doesn't have a religion, doesn't have a voice, doesn't have opinion, doesn't have a history, and what we work with in healthcare does. So it's a non-linear world for us, and many of these other environments are linear worlds. You have to be able to bridge that gap, so it can't just be a copy-paste. So as you see on this roadmap, as we close here, what their approach was, they happen to have a 3 or 4 year road. And just to be clear, there is no end date to this road for them. Their journey started with a couple of big items. So you see it was the assess and develop a central HRO platform, and then a common standardized language. What was important to them is they have several facilities underneath a system, and the comment was made, if I walk into each facility, I would never guess that they're underneath the same system. So how do we create a standard protocol, a standard language that we can all leverage? And then I want to point this out because you can read the rest of those bullets. The power of those that make it stick is this thing called transparency or transformation rounds. 2 different types of rounds. The transparency rounds you see, those are bringing things to the surface. That's that one in the middle with the dashes. That's getting transparent. Now, some say we should have done that in the beginning. We would caution you and say, if you didn't do what we talked about earlier in this webinar, you might set yourself up in a trap to not be able to absorb those things that pop up. So while transparency, of course, is important, just make sure you're ready for it and what it's about to bring you, because you're going to look worse before you get better as you navigate through shining a light on areas that frankly didn't have a light shine on it before. And then the second type of round they do is transformational rounds. And when you talk to those that make it stick, so the 20% that actually do survive, it's the continual touch. It's the 55% of the people on this phone call were in an executive leadership role. It's having someone script for you or nudge you with a couple of things. Hey, when you go to these departments, just do me a favor and bring these 2 things up to make sure they know that this is still top of mind, and never let it die. The problem we have with HRO is we lump it into a project-based management system, which means there's a start date and an end date. So you lather everybody up in the beginning, you ride the wave of excitement, you start to fix stuff which makes people nervous, and then you fall off because you have a hard time making it stick and there's friction. And then there's an end date so you can move on to something else. In an HRO world, there is nothing else. It's a forever thing. It's a lifestyle change. So we just have to make sure at the beginning we embed these components to make sure it sticks.
So Tony, that's I think a really nice point, because I think as we had a little discussion before the webinar today, administrators aren't around necessarily forever. Sometimes it's 2 to 5 years, and I think what you just talked about is planting some seeds that grow forever. These transformational rounds, if they're continued year over year over year, they become part of that process, and they kind of transcend who the particular leadership is at that time.
So to that point, Steve, and I should be clear here, I'm not telling you to go out to your organizations and say, we have a plan forever, because people need to get their arms around things. So what you need, and there are some other things we didn't talk about in this phone call, like the Cotter principles, the Cotter factors for change. There are 8 significant steps. One of them is quick wins. We have got to find a way to get some quick wins. So while we can announce these types of things, what are we doing, however small, as an organization, not a unit, not a small micro area, but how can we keep the momentum going underneath while we're trying to get people and these processes implemented? So the ability to pepper in quick wins needs to happen within the first 3 to 6 months. You need a plan for the first 100 days, for the first 3 to 6 months, for the next 6 to 12 months, so on and so forth, with an eye to the concept of HRO as a forever thing. What you can choose to bundle under it could be many things. Some people are bundling underneath HRO their EMR install, believe it or not, with the idea of being error-free operation. So when we ask a physician or nurse to put charges in or to use an EMR system that may be new to my organization, how do we promote an error-free operation of that system? Or it could be CPOE, or it could be new medical equipment you're using in the OR, or a change you have in the registration process. They begin bundling things underneath. What we're not talking about on this call is scope creep and making sure you put boundaries around your first version of HRO so you don't start boiling the ocean. So to Steve's point, if you had to ask me, I'm going to guess that, I've seen HRO journeys that the meat of the work happens in the 6th to the 24th month, because the first 4 or 5 or 6 months is just gathering intel, making sure we agree, getting that leadership alignment. The meat of it happens between month 6 and 24, and then hopefully half of it's inculcated, and then month 25 for forever is just nurturing that process. And lastly, for the people on the phone call, a lot of you are leaders. You can't buy culture. When you talk about how you're going to drive your HRO strategy, you need to think about, do we need a nudge? Do we need to be handheld? And do our people need to be handheld? Or do you need someone to help do it for you the first time, and then you can take a look at what that is and leverage that going forward? And again, it's not an external thing, it could be an internal thing. Do you have certain departments that just need a nudge? Do you have others that really need to be handheld? And for others, do you need to show them the light? Do you need to actually do it for them and then let them take it from there? And that is a tough conversation, but it needs to happen now, early on, before you get too far down the road.
Great. Well, thank you both so much, Steve and Tony, and hopefully everybody has found this really helpful. So just to find out so that we can make our future webinars even better, we want to know, did you find this information helpful? Did you learn anything, or did you already know all of this?
And just to be clear, while they're doing this, we are going to go through a Q&A here.
We are, yes. So right after this, we are going to open up at least the question chat on the side for some questions. Great. Well, thank you all for voting. I've got a few last tricklers. Great. Thank you so much. Looks like a lot of people found this helpful, which is great. Now, before we get into the Q&A, I did just want to have a couple of little housekeeping reminders. If you have any additional questions after today, please feel free to email us at info@myrounding.com, and we will direct you to the most appropriate person to answer that question. If you want a copy of the presentation or the recording, it'll be available on our SlideShare at slideshare.net/myrounding. It'll also be available on our website. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we have our next webinar coming up in December, and it's going to be on MACRA, which is a super hot topic, as everybody knows. So come join us, and we'll talk about what's going on with that and how you can help prepare yourselves.
So, Katie, it does look like we've got some questions, and one of the first ones that I see here is Tony available for on-site coaching?
Yeah, of course, we're happy to help. And let me, before I go on site anywhere, we have a pretty pragmatic approach to deployment. I've been doing this for 25 years across 80 countries and 6 continents in a bunch of different scenarios. And while we of course have a framework, the great ones understand, the leadership teams, that you can't copy paste. So as we have these conversations, the leadership needs to know that there is no secret book out there that you can buy for $19.99 and kind of develop a plan. It's going to be a hodgepodge of really good, smart people getting together. So as long as that's your view, absolutely no problem.
And Tony, I would imagine you probably wouldn't mind if people want to reach directly out to you. Your email
so Katie, so is my info on here? So if I could ask you to reach out, how do you want to do this? Through you, Katie, maybe? Or info@myrounding? Or
yeah, they can just email info@myrounding.
Yeah, and then I'll make sure I connect. And the reason I say that is because of my duties and what I do. I want to make sure I get back to you quickly. So if you could go through info@myrounding, we will get back to you ASAP.
Great. So then we also have another question of, can we get the sticky index assessment?
Yeah, of course. And for everybody on the phone call, you can get anything we talked about. So we're happy to share everything. So for those interested, I think, Katie, they go through you again, just to make sure. But our goal is to help you guys along and nudge you. And we know how difficult this process is. But with that said, if we can create a community here to kind of learn from each other, all the better. So happy to share everything I discussed.
Great. One more question here, and if you have more questions on the line, please feel free to type those into the question box on the right. But the next question we have is, how have you seen hospitals working towards implementing HRO? You know, what are some successes or failures you've seen?
Man, that's a loaded question.
It is.
So to be honest, I'm gonna lump this in 3 buckets, and I'm just being candid. 10% of the folks out there are doing it because they know they have to, and they know they're not going to be around in 5 to 7 years, so they're treading water, just to be candid. Then there's 70% of the group that's trying everything and not getting much of anything. And then there's the last 15, 20%, and that's the group that kind of gets it. Doesn't mean they're doing better than the others, but they get the process. They get the DNA that makes up a great HRO. So, you know, if I talk about that first bucket, what do you think is going to happen with that first bucket? The first bucket is treading water. And people see it. It's like children with a mother and a father. If the mother and father are bickering, the children see it. Same thing with the leadership team. If they can see that they're kind of half in, half out, it goes through the organization. Let's talk about the big 70% group. That's the group trying everything. So you have some excitement, some frustration, and I can't wait to leave, or I'm hoping this is going to be my career. You get everything. And the problem with that is you end up having pockets of great things that don't necessarily tie, so frustration ensues. So that's the challenge of the middle group, is I've tried all these things, I spent a bunch of money, but I'm not seeing result. They're kind of in a corrective stage here, just looking to realign after their first jump in the water. And then that last group, you know, if I say anything, everyone on this phone call, you need grit, you need perseverance, you need drive, and you got to just toe the line as this journey starts, and make sure you look at each other, and are you ready for that? Listen, can you take bits and pieces and make small improvements? Of course you can. I encourage you to. But if you're truly talking HRO, there is a couple of things I'd encourage you to do on the front end in a safe environment before it's announced to everyone, to make sure you identify the gotchas before you start. Doesn't mean you have to solve them all, just identify them so we're aware of it, so we're not surprised. The goal of a good HRO is you have no surprises. The transparency thing is a struggle for everybody, to be candid, The just culture is a struggle for everybody. This process improvement engine is a significant struggle in healthcare. We don't think that way, but true HROs have those components. Long answer to a simple question.
I don't know if that was a simple question. All right, I think that that's all the questions that I'm seeing. So if you have any others, go ahead and add those in there real quick. We will remain on the line for a couple of minutes, but otherwise, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope that you were able to get some great information from this webinar. Don't forget about the ebook available in the right-hand sidebar, as well as the recording that will be available later today or tomorrow. You will get an email once that's available. And don't forget to join us in December for our webinar on MACRA.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Tony.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.
All right, so it looks like we don't have any more questions, so thank you for anybody that's hanging out with us on the line, but we are going to go ahead and end the webinar. So thank you again for attending.